Hello and welcome to Macro Mondays presented by the Gokhstein News Network. I am your host, Landy, and today is September 29th, 2025. We're going to talk about Bitcoin solely today because we're going to take a look at some of the higher term time frame structure as we head into the monthly and quarterly close here, we're in the last daily candle of the month, technically. This is the candle of the 30th that is open right now. Of course, it is still Monday. And there's a few things to note here on the daily, and then we'll get into some of the higher term time frame stuff. And we might even actually from the daily, might even go and look at some lower term time frame stuff. We'll see. We'll see how it goes here. Look, the main overhead resistance is 118. That's essentially this line. Yes, it's a little bit lower than that. It's like 117 and 117 and a quarter or so. But the swing highs here into this this higher low structure around 117.3 is one of the main areas of interest overhead that we've seen Bitcoin come up and reject from and not close above. Now, for Bitcoin to get continuation, into the tighter range up here, especially the top side around the 120 to 121 up here, prior to that 123 and 124 and a half high up there, we need to see closes back above around the 117 and a half to 118 high here specifically to get that continuation to test up a little bit further. There is some swings in here as well to be aware of on lower term timeframes right before we see that 120 to 121 area, but on closes above around 118, at least look for swings to the 120 to 121 area if it does occur. Now, current structure, we had this nice little uptrend off of the lower low structure. So we had the downtrend here. We had the consolidation to a weekly retest at 112 before going up to our 125 target and coming up about $500 short, but that's essentially 125 hit here at 124 and a half. Everything dumped out. We came to the bottom side of the range here around 112, tried to sit on the weekly and then spiked up into the tighter range closes here around that, the low side there around the 117 and a half and rejected all the way down to the daily area. And you'll notice that this daily area was the consolidation of the prior range. So we had the high over here at 112. And then as price headed down and hit some of the key areas to the downside, when we saw the recovery, specifically, put in the weekly, the weekly higher low. This was a weekly higher low, by the way, at 101 to 98,225. But we saw the structure change, right? So we saw that we had a closing structural change. So we had closing higher highs, higher low, higher high, broke the swing downtrend of this candle here, and then consolidated before running the actual highs and breaking out. Now, this consolidation structure is right where Bitcoin came back to on its lower low structure over here at the 107,250, essentially running this swing low at 107,270, closing at that 108 level and then working its way right back up to the 117 and a half and making a swing for our number that we've been talking about, 118, and missing by less than $2. So a dollar and $1 and 83 cents or something like that. So in this case, we do see now after that big trend break off of the uptrend off the lows, we had a big trend break and we had a swing downtrend. So this is a swing high that was just closed above when Bitcoin closed above the basis band. So we have some encouraging things going on here, and we can really draw some pretty easy criteria here, and we'll actually put the low right as red. We need to stay closing above that last low at 108, 600 or so, and especially above the 108 close. If we start to see the 108 250 close, and then subsequently we're looking for 107 250 and lower on swings, and then any closes below there are going to beget moves to 104 105 over here. But in reality, what we have to look out for is the early etchings of a potential move back up to put in either a larger closing trend break or a potential reversal setup off the lows here, because now we do have a swing high break for the daily trend. So we just have to kind of consider what's going on right now. Bitcoin's essentially neutral, right back in the basis band here is closing above in the strong half of the bands, which does give us the bias up to, some of the areas of interest over here. The weekly lower high was already set, and I'm going to show you that in just a moment, but it was set on closes below 114.4. It's essentially right where we are testing now is where the closing lower high in the weekly was just put in, which is a trend reversal setup. Not a foregone conclusion that we'll see a reversal, but it is a reversal setup. And in this case, if we can see, Bitcoin closing above there, then we can start entertaining moves back to this swing outside of the range here at that 114.750 to the 115.7, 116 area over here. And then eventually up into the 116.5 by the upper first. That area is essentially 116 to 118, which is the high right here. So once we see an approach to that upper first, if we start to see closes above there and see a closing reclaim, then we can look for that 118 level and above to 119, 120, which would put Bitcoin right around this swing structure before hitting the main overhead closing resistance around the highs here at 120 to 121 on the swing highs for the tighter range up here. And I'm gonna turn on the my support and resistance areas of interest that we've been looking at the entire time. But I want to explain kind of what to look for. As I just hit my watch on the microphone. Sorry about that. But in this case, off of this trend breaking structure for the swing trend, of course, closing trending high is up here, right? This is actually a higher high. So lower low to higher high. If we were to see Bitcoin go right back up and take out the higher high, very high probability that we would see higher lows as it relates to this last low. But even from here, because we have a swing trend break above 114, this swing high right here, where Bitcoin tested the basis band, or the 20 simple, if you will. From here, we have to be aware of closes that potentially come up wherever this next high comes in. We're looking for higher low or equal low trend reversal setups. If not, that would be invalidated on closes back below the 108.620 or so here. And then we'd be looking at the lows over here again. Now we are also getting a trend, sorry, not a trend shift, but a momentum shift here on the daily. And that is good to see. It's coming from the oversold zone and trying to work its way towards the top of the bear zone here. Closes above essentially 110. We'll continue to see momentum pushing to the upside, but we need to see price following. We also do have a hidden drive of bullish divergence confirmed on this last low. So we're probably going to see that across the board as we go up the time frames. But let's go ahead and just reference what we've been talking about the entire time, which is really what's been defining this range. And that is our support and resistance zones of interest, right? We're right on the bottom side of this swing low of the tighter range up here after putting in 123K and testing 112, that prior weekly higher high. And in this case, we need to see even in lower term time frames, 114.750 to go and test that 115.7 to 116. And then it's right back in the thick of resistance, essentially between 116 and 118. Need to see closes above there to really start targeting the green zone, 120 to 121. Then above there, we can look for, price moving back to 123 to 125 as a target, and then potentially up to this 1414 at 128 to 130, potentially more, depending on, especially closing above the upper second. The conditions would be close above the upper second and the tighter range swing highs to initiate expansion back to the all-time high at 123 to essentially 125, because that would be Bollinger Band expansion back to the top side. Same to the downside. If you start to see 112 break, yes, we're right back in the thick of that daily support around 111 to 109.5 by that lower second. But if we start to see 109 dropped, that'd be dropping the lower second, heading back to the lows on expansion essentially, and then targeting this next big daily level of interest at 107 to 108. Anywhere below there, then we're looking at kind of 106 or 104 to 106, with 105 being the median right there with this higher low before the consolidation over there. So that's really the way to look at it, is don't want to see closes below 109, because if you start to see closes below 109, that would be expansion back into some of the support structure to the downside And if it really got expanded down through the 107, 105, 103 and a half fibs, which is a fib rather, then I'd be looking for, essentially, a confirmation on the weekly for that reversal setup that's been showing that I'm going to get to in just a moment, but essentially targeting the next big area, which would be 101 to that 98, 225. Let's go take a look at the weekly, by the way. So the weekly did close above 112. We're back in this compression. And I know this is kind of a mess, but bear with me. This is also the basis band on the weekly. So closing above the basis band is what we wanted to see. Closing above the upper first. Essentially, if the weekly begins to climb up on each daily before Sunday, we're likely going to see that upper first right smack dab on 118. So we need to see this now lower high that was confirmed with this structure right here. We need to see this upper first and that 118 broken, especially coming into a weekly close on Sunday. That would look really good if it hasn't already tested 120 to 121. Then I'd be looking for that test and potentially up to the upper second, which is right around that 123 high. And it closes above there, it's off to the races again. I also want to note that to the downside, if we start to see a breakdown from this weekly at 109, caution below 112. Just pay very close attention. If we start to see 109 dropped, and especially that low of last week, then we're looking towards that 107 to 108 right by the lower first. Anywhere below there, we're looking at Bitcoin kind of keeling over and heading lower down to this bigger area down here. Now, there is a lot of room between the lower first and lower second here, but the lower second is kind of bracketing a very important zone around that 101 to 98. So just pay very, very close attention. And we're going to take a look at the just the structure here, right? So we have swing structure that has now resulted in a in a closing structure lower high, right? So we have higher low, higher high, higher low, higher high, lower low swing, right? And it's still a higher low close, by the way. And then we have a lower high essentially now, right? So when looking at this, what you see here is that the swing trend was up. This was a complex high. Even though there was a higher low swing to higher high swing, this was a complex closing high. So it's a singular high, even though we did break the swing downtrend that preceded the closing lower high here. That was our warning that we had to look out for a potential lower high close. Now this is the last higher low at that 107.250. We do have a swing trend and closing lower high, but if Bitcoin goes right back up and breaks this, then we're back in a swing trend break to the upside and a closing trend break to the upside. Closing trend break technically would come in above 115.3 or so, but you need to see the 118 closed or it doesn't mean anything. It's just consolidation. The other thing I want to note here is on the weekly, we've gone from compression and now we're gone from, compression after a big expansion. We had the initial squeeze of the bands here, compression phase, and a threatening of lower downside expansion here, but no closes below the lower second and that swing low at that 76, 550 or so. Where we saw the 74, 420, 69 wick come in, but no closes below there, and then reversed right back to the top side and then trended. Well, now we're back in a compression phase, and it's basically a range. Below essentially, 101 here at the lower second, that's downside expansion into this low at 98. Now, if we were to see closes below the lower second, we would need to see closes below that 98, 225 for expansion to kick off to the downside on the weekly. Right? Not just get down here and close below the lower second. We'd need to see an additional close over close below that 98, 225. If it wasn't already expanding, it would start to kick off that weekly expansion in earnest. We are at a zero right now because Bitcoin is right on the basis band. So we are very compressed. That's why we're showing a range, very easy range, 118 to the top side. Go test the highs around 123 to 125. And he closes above the upper second and 125, essentially 124 and a half. We're looking at upside expansion into that upper third, 128 to 130, and then potentially much more. I think we've got we'll have daily targets, stuff like that, but 138 to 140, 148 to 150 are major fib levels up there for macro time frames, and even this local structure on the monthly, which we're going to go look at now. And by the way, I want to take a look actually at the 5-day real quick. 5-day, yeah, trend break 118, and closing higher low 114. So that would actually look really good in the next 5-day that closes in 3 days. If we close above 114, then it's going to look like Bitcoin wants to try for that trend break and need to see closes above 118 up here. Okay, that is what I'm going to be watching for. And that would beget a turn in momentum and another drive of hidden bullish divergence, which essentially is targeting the highs and potentially higher. And now let's get into some longer term time frame stuff. All right, the monthly. This is the last day of the month. This is what you want to see. You want to see no high put in. That is essentially because it was threatening to put in a high in the monthly. Now, it doesn't mean that it won't just turn around next month, but the monthly was threatening to put in a high on any closes below 107,370, right? So that's the swing low of the monthly over here. We have the 105, 120 here. Essentially, we want to see, preferably, we'd want to see closes back above right around 115, 750, 115, 800 or so. That is the big daily level. 115.7 is the bottom side of the tighter range, 115.7 to 116. That is the big daily level I've talked about for so long. Some people take 116 to 118 as that tighter range of overhead resistance, right? But it's 115.7. We need to see that reclaimed. That would be great to see it by tonight. That would look good to invalidate the body of this inverted hammer candle. But we need to see how things go, right? We need to see how things go. It'd look even better if it just, decided to rocket up to the upper second up here, which is right around 123.5, essentially this high over here. That's kind of where we'd want to see price closing to start initiating expansion, but we won't initiate expansion again on the monthly time frame. You see that we are in a compression right now, but we won't initiate upside expansion until we see close above the upper second at 123.5 to that 124.5. That would look really good, but this is going to move up. So it's likely going to be, maybe it starts to flatten out in a range because it is, fairly compressed right now, but it's probably going to be around 125 to 128, which is a major fib level, right? And for that fib level for some of the other areas of interest, that 1414 at $128,000, it matches the macro fib level from the prior cycle high, right? This prior cycle high to the low in 22 at 115.5. That 1414 is perfectly matching the local higher high close to higher low close here on the monthly for the prior higher high to higher low. We haven't had a higher high confirmed yet, the swing highs in, but we haven't had it confirmed. That's where we get 128 as confluence at 21414s, both a macro and a local from the prior extension structure. And then above there, we could start looking at 138 to 140, 148 to 150, essentially by the 1786, which is just shy of 148, and then continue on from there. But we need to see closes really start to get rolling above the current highs, essentially. You want to see 124.5 on a monthly close, not just some dailies and a weekly and go on a run and then swing out or wick out. That would look bad. Now, monthly is, hot up here, but no high just yet. Quarterly is the big one. And this is where we're going to go to the index real quick here. So we're going to go Bitcoin, go to the index. And I've mentioned this before. Quarterly is still in a compressive state. Now, granted, it's a sideways and up grind, and we have had volatility, specifically back to the basis band and slightly below for the first time in Bitcoin's history on the quarterly, but now it's just grinding between the upper first and upper third. We haven't seen real full-on expansion. Closes above 109, which is that big weekly level, would start to look like, continuing BBWP increase. But in order to get expansion, like full-on expansion, we need to see, if it doesn't close above there by, tomorrow, or today's candle, the Tuesday candle, which I don't think it's going to, then we need to see, the next following weeks and monthlies follow through with the quarterly by year end closing. Essentially, it's 124.5 on spot, 124.3 here on index, and then start to push 138 and above. 138 and above on closes would start to get Bollinger Band expansion, which has not kicked off on the quarterly time frame. And I know it's like, well, it's young, it's an asset, and it's growing, and it's going to get less volatile over time. Yeah, okay. Well, when a quarterly starts to kick off, we can kind of kiss volatility or less volatility goodbye for a little while, at least 2 quarters. And that's kind of, even in an environment like last cycle, at least 2 quarters, and we really haven't seen it. We've just been grinding sideways and up, which reminds me of what gold did. Now, gold remember, they had a 2-year bear market in gold, so don't forget that. But that does remind me of what gold did back in the prior to ETFs launching, or right into the ETF launch. Went on that 12-year period of essentially a bull market with a 2-year bear period in between. So, yeah, exciting stuff. Close above 109. That's going to look good. And for the monthly, really want to see Bitcoin closing above essentially 115.7. That would look good. And that's that daily overhead area. So monthly, 115.7, essentially 115.8. You can call it 116 if you want. That's really where you want to see Bitcoin closing the Tuesday candle. If it can continue to push up to the downside, let's just review real quick here. To the downside, you just don't want to see... realistically, you don't want to see 112 dropped. Then we're starting to run back into the dailies and threatening that weekly there that we just saw the nice, beautiful close open on 109. That would look bad, and it would be a rejection around the basis band. So if it does come back in lower term timeframes and swing it, 112 is fine, and even a dip under into 112 is fine. Closing below there, 111.5 would look like another lower high, and that would be a lower high close with a lower low close already in place, which would be trend continuation or trend reversal setup. That'd be the true trend reversal setup if you didn't take the swing down trend. So the swing lower low, swing over here to that rejection, which failed to close above, the 113.5 over here essentially. That was kind of the name of the game right there. Closed like right on it, but it was essentially rejection, then down. All right, that's all I got for you. I will be back on Wednesday, and we'll take another look, see where the monthly and quarterly closed, see how the dailies are doing, and what to look forward to in terms of areas of interest to the upside and downside for Bitcoin. We'll take a look at Ethereum and some other majors as well. You have a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening, no matter where you are in the world. Please trade safe. And of course, as always, stay safe. Go ahead and like and share this and all that good social media stuff. And I'll talk to you again on Wednesday. Landy out. Take care.